In this moment of stillness, we seek inner peace and strength. May we act with kindness, embrace wisdom, and face challenges with resilience. Let our heart be filled with gratitude and our minds open to understanding. Also, remembering our founding father, great Mannat Padmanabhan, on this occasion.
Thank you, Veena. Now, I would like to invite Jwala from First MA English for her welcome speech.
Good evening, all. Myself, Jwala, first MA student, extend a hearty welcome to all of you on behalf of the PG Department of English, NSS College, Pandalam. As we all know, today we are gathered here for the 14th lecture series of RRR, that is Reading, Rereading, and Reconstructing. First of all, I would like to welcome our respected principal, Dr. M.G. Sanil Kumar, in absentia to this program. I would also like to welcome our respected HOD, Dr. Anjana J. in absentia to this event. Now, I am profoundly delighted to take this opportunity to welcome our honorable chief guest for today's session. She is none other than Ritobina Chakraborty, a teaching assistant from Edinburgh University. We are grateful to you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation for being the chief guest of today's event. I extend an affable welcome to you, ma'am. I also welcome the first PG students who have organized this event, and I would also like to welcome the teacher coordinators Harita R. Unnitan, Revati S. and Lakshmi Prasannan to this session. I also extend a gracious and inclusive welcome to all our beloved teachers and students who are gathered here today. Once again, I heartily welcome you all to this event. Here, we gather not only as an audience, but as explorers in the realm of knowledge. So, with gratitude for your presence and excitement for the intellectual exploration that lies ahead, together let us lend our ears to Ritobina Chakraborty. Thank you.
Thank you, Jwala, for your words. Now it's time to introduce our guest to the session. For that, I invite Aishwarya of First MA English to take over.
Good evening, everyone. I am Aishwarya, representing first year MA English. It is both an honor and a source of enthusiasm to introduce our distinguished guest today. It is none other than Ritobina Chakraborty. She has completed her graduation in English Literature from the University of Calcutta and her master's from St. Xavier's University. After completing her PhD coursework in India, she shifted to the University of Edinburgh to pursue her PhD. She specializes in queer studies, gender and sexuality studies with special reference to modern and contemporary literature. Her secondary research encompasses women's writing in Afghanistan and Bangladesh. She has presented papers widely in India, the United Kingdom, USA, and Canada. She has her paper published in both UGCKL listed journals and international journals. Her upcoming chapters on masculinity and environmentalism will be published with Palgrave Macmillan. She received the Citizen Historian Award from Stanford 1947, Partition Arcade, California, Berkeley. She is also the panelist for the James Stott Black Memorial Prize, the oldest literary award. She has her own reading group, which is the first international reading group on queer studies with over 300 participants. Along with her research, she also teaches at University of Edinburgh on modules of contemporary literature, queer literature, and modern and postmodern literature. So, without further delay, on behalf of the PG Department of English, NSS College Pandalam, it's my proud privilege to welcome our chief guest, Ritobina Chakraborty. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this very elaborate welcome. I hope I'm audible. Can someone just let me know if I'm audible to all of you? Uh, can you hear?
Yes,
Okay.
you are.
Thank you. I think I'll begin by thanking Harita first for thinking of me, and I'm all Unfortunately, it's a very bad allergic trigger that I'm having. So please excuse if my voice suddenly chokes up and my very disheveled appearance at this moment. Nevertheless, thank you, Haritha, for inviting me. Thank you, all of you, for taking out time from the schedule and joining me on a Saturday evening. Nevertheless, that's such a wonderful way of spending a weekend, I believe. Literature, that's something that is binding all of us right now. Uh, it would be lovely to see some of your faces because we are in a virtual space. So it's like looking at a box. If only my video is on. So it would be really nice if we can have some of the videos on. And I hope it would be a very interactive session. So the plan is that I'm going to give a brief introduction to queer studies and a very brief introduction to the theory that I have chosen for today, so that we can, while we discuss Siren, the short story that has already been circulated, and I'm hoping that you all have read it. And if you have not read it, I would be giving a little introduction to that as well. Um, so the plan is to give a brief introduction to queer studies, and the theory that I have chosen is very elemental in understanding and our introduction to the queer studies module. And as I give an introduction to the theory, the reason that I've chosen Butler, Judith Butler, for today is because we are going to read Siren through the lens of Judith Butler's theory of precarity. I'm just going to write it down on the chat box so that you can note down and we can discuss this more. I am going to explain what precarity is and what Butler means by precarity and precariousness, and how Butler's idea of precarity is different from the idea of precariousness. And we are going to apply whatever that I'm saying today in our reading of the short story Siren. And the reason why I want to do that is because you all are at the master's level, you all are at that level from where you can decide if you want to do literature formally, if you want to take up a PhD, if even it's completely fine if you don't want to do a PhD, if you want to be a writer or whatever that you want to be. So that would help you understand how we can have a lens. It could be a queer lens, it could be a post-colonial lens, it could be a lens of postmodernism, it could be a lens of affect and environmental studies and Gothic studies. And it is like, take today's lecture as a way of how we can apply something into a piece of literature and how we can derive our interpretation of it. Because the study of literature is not just learning about the relevant body of literature which is already existing, it is also about how we can contribute to it. So yeah, that's the plan, and I hope that you all like it. And it's a very interactive session. So if I'm going very fast or if my voice suddenly cuts off because of the internet, just let me know and I'll try to do something about it. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Or just drop the question on the chat box and I'll try to answer all your questions as easily as I possibly can. So what do we understand by queer studies? And it's a relatively newer term. It's a relatively newer arena of studies because queer studies is still something where most of the universities in India doesn't have a module on it. And considering the present scenario, the queer studies is something which is slowly getting disrupted from our way of knowledge. To say this, it is important to understand that queer is not a Western concept. If you go back to our history, if you go back to our temples, if you go back to our mythology, if you go back to our literature, if you go back to Kama Sutra and all of these books, you'll understand that the queer culture has been our culture. It is not a Western concept, which is a misnomer. The LGBTQIA community or the queer community is not the Western influence on Eastern culture. Rather, homophobia is a Western concept. The phobia of the other, here by other, the big other, I mean, as you all might know, the other is a very relevant post-colonial term as well. Here by the other, I mean the queer community. So the othering is a very Western concept. The othering of the queer community is something which is derived from the West and has been built up by our constitutional creation of the present modern India. However, but the idea of queer has to trace the idea from where the queer studies begin. We have to trace it back to gender studies. And to I understand what gender studies is, we have to kind of trace this back to feminism. It all begins from feminism. Gender studies begins from feminism. Queer studies begins from feminism. So if we draw a particular tree, so it has to be feminism from where gender studies is branching out, and from there queer studies is branching out. And the reason that we are focusing on the queer, and the reason that there has been divisions to begin with, it is to emphasize on the fact that there are differences. Just like white feminism is very different from black feminism is very different from Dalit feminism. Similarly, when we do gender studies, and from gender studies, as we're doing gender studies, we realize that you cannot club everything and say this is gender studies. And from there, we understand that there is a need to do queer reading. There is a need to understand how there is a difference between the different categories that we at the point we are practicing. So Simone de Beauvoir in the second sex, if I'm going very fast, please feel free to just stop me and I'll just repeat myself. I tend to go a bit fast at times. So Simone de Beauvoir in second sex, the very elemental feminist text, she says that sex is biological, but gender is social. So there's a difference between sex and gender. Sex, according to Beauvoir, is the anatomical vagina or the anatomical penis that we are born with. But the gender that we are ascribed to, the masculine or the feminine, is something which is social. To give you a very cross example, is that when a boy is born, the boy is wrapped in a blue towel, while the girl child, the infant, is wrapped in a pink towel. So these are the little social performances which leads to the creation of the genders. But in 1991, Judith Butler, with Gender Trouble, says that I agree with Uwa, but partially. I believe that gender is social. But what I do not believe is that sex is biological. I believe sex too is social. And how does this concept become complicated? How does this idea that sex is also social become complicated? That is when the idea of performance comes. And Butler says, you'll find this in the second chapter of gender studies. Butler says that gender is nothing but the repetition of performance. When we keep on performing particular things, when we keep on performing things as a form of ritual, and here by ritual, I obviously do not mean that you have to light incense, you have to gather flowers, you'll have to do this. I mean this process, the fact that I am looking at you and you are listening while I am speaking is also a very ritualistic process, because here I have been invited to talk. But when I am listening and somebody else is talking, that the ritual is the same, but the participants is on the two ends, the opposite ends. I am no longer on the talking end. I am then on the listening end. So this too is a ritualistic performance. So what Butler says is that when a particular thing is continuously performed, it becomes a ritualistic interpretation of gender and sex. Like a woman is supposed to dress a certain way. A woman is supposed to cook the food while the patriarch of the family is going out and gathering monetary benefits for the family. This process has been repeated so many times that it is giving birth to genders and sexual differences. This particular point can also be traced back to the origin of family by Engels and Marx, where Engels says, and this is something that Engels says, and it is also critiqued in Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex. Engels says that the origin of family happened when the man decided to go out and gather monetary benefits on the basis of its physical capability, while the woman is staying inside the house and managing all the other things. And this is something which is written in Marx and Engels as the origin of family. And Simone de Beauvoir says that what Engels and Marx have forgotten to understand is that this can also be seen through a feminist lens. The moment the origin of family is happening, the woman's body is also getting patriarched by the so-called patriarch of the family. The man, just because has the physical capability, is right now also owning the family, owning the mother, owning the children. The children are getting the father's surname. So this ritualistic repetition of a particular act becomes performance. And Butler says when we start adhering to this performance, that is when sex and gender is created. So this right now, I hope I am clear so far. If I'm not clear, you can please raise your hand and I will repeat myself. Um, This is where Butler introduces the idea of precarity and precariousness. I have already written precarity in the chat box, and let me write down what precariousness is. So Butler's idea of precarity and precariousness becomes very important. And from just this sound of it, you can understand that precarity is something which is different. So what Butler says is that precariousness denotes the ontological condition of interdependency, vulnerability, and bodily exposure to socio-economic and political forces. So to explain it to you in easier terms, what Butler means is that when we look at a body, a gendered body, a sexed body, the body gets its gender and sex by its relation to other factors in its environment. That is, for example, me, if I take myself here, I gather my sex or my gender because of my relationship to the walls around me, because of the relationship to this house around me, because of my relationship to the inhabitants of the house around me. So there is a living and a non-living relationship that we all kind of share with our environment. And with this introduction to our environment, with our interdependency to this environment and the environmental factors, that our bodies become precarious. And over here, Butler makes another differentiation. Butler says there's a difference between the precariousness, that is the relationship that we all share with our environment and the people around us, and there's a difference between being precarity. So under this precarity falls those bodies who are even more marginalized. For example, if I take India, the marginalized, the SC, ST, OBC, the Dalit community, they are the precarity community because they are not the majority. And Butler again brings the entire queer community as precarious bodies, as precarity, as someone who, with their relationship to the social, to the political, to the economic, becomes even more precarious. To give you another example, if you take the current law, if you take the current scenario in India at the moment, the LGBTQ community is still fighting to have babies, the rights to adoption, rights to owning houses and property, the rights to having their partners, their same-sex partners or their non-binary partners as nominees. So these relationships to the social, to the economical, for if you look at the Hijra community of India, the Hijra community is something that I presented a paper recently, and it was asked that so every trans person in India a Hijra, and I had to explain that no, a hijra, you'll never find a person from the middle income community or higher community identifying themselves as hijra. They identify themselves to be trans because they have the monetary benefit of calling themselves trans. They have the monetary benefit and the social benefit that comes from having a certain bank balance, from being from a so-called family where they can say that I identify as trans and have the right to the same education as 20 other heterosexual child is having the education as them. But if you come to the Hijra community, to people who have to leave their house and start living outside, as you all must know, that the Hijra community have their own house. They have a guruma. They have this particular leader who trained them into the various artifacts of being a Hijra, of the dance, the art of being the Hijra. And they are not educated. They have no right in the constituency. It is as new as 2013 in our neighboring country like Bangladesh that the constituency for the first time accepted and acknowledged the presence of the trans community or the Hijra community in a country like Bangladesh, which is so ancient. It is not like the trans community never existed. It did exist. It always existed, but it is as new as 2013 that for the first time that the constituency acknowledged the presence of the quote-unquote third sex. I do not personally agree with this term, but this is the terminology that was used, and this is the terminology which at least acknowledged the presence of the queer community in Bangladesh, the queer trans community. So the relationship that the social, the economical, the political relationship we have is also something which becomes more precarious. So a heterosexual person's problems is multiplied when you come to bring it to a homosexual person's problems. So this precariousness cannot be identified in singularity. The precariousness cannot be identified in individuation. It is a collective precariousness. It is a collective precarity. And this precarity increases. And this precarity again gives birth to the sexual categories that we have right now. A part of my thesis is to question the categories. A part of my own research is to question and identify the necessity of the categories and how true these categories are and how porous these categories can also be. Like Foucault says in the history of sexuality that homosexuality was suddenly discovered in the 70s. What Foucault means is that is for the first time that a name was given. That is for the first time that a same-sex name was given. And the term gay, G-A-Y, gay, has also gone through several of its discourses to finally arrive at this universally acclaimed gaze. But that is also different. A white homosexual person's political precarity is very different from a black man's homosexual precarity. That is again very, very different from a brown man's precarity, from a Hindu man's precarity, from a Muslim man's precarity. Minority becomes a very important question here, therefore. However, when we relook at the queer perspective impinges on us the fact that there are so many holes in our constituent interpretation of a particular community. So yes, this was my 15 minutes introduction to you all. Queerness cannot be explained in 15 minutes. It's literally impossible. But yes, so far, if you have any questions, please go ahead. If you do not have any questions, may I ask someone to volunteer and give us a very brief introduction to our short story, Siren. just unmute and volunteer. I would like this to be a very, not a very monolithical session. I would really love to hear voices. So yeah, does anyone want to give a short introduction to our short story? Uh, can someone tell me how much time I have? Like, uh, the MC of this particular meeting? Can I take another
So
20 minutes? Will that,
yeah, definitely you can
Harita?
take. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So yeah, since no one has volunteered, and I'm very sad because of that, though it cannot be visible right now because I already have a very disfigured face at the moment. Anyway, so the siren, the reason that I chose this particular short story, because I felt like this would explain the idea of precarity and the idea of queer trouble very, very easily. So I don't know if you were familiar with Amanda Lee's work before this, and I personally I think it's one of the finest short stories from the Singaporean collective at the moment. She's Singaporean, and the short story from its name, as you can understand, is Siren. And it is quite literally the physical, obviously imaginative, but the physical manifestation of the Singaporean icon, which is like half lion and half fish. And the Morlian, that the Singaporean Morlian that it is. And the person becomes very important here. Because if you look at our protagonist has an unnamed mother. Our protagonist becomes marginalized from the very core. Firstly, the person becomes marginalized economically. How does the person become marginalized economically? It is because the person is a fisherman. It's a fisherman's child. So the economical precarity is that the person who we are dealing with in the particular short story, is that he belongs to the marginal economical classes. The second becomes important is the social precarity. How does the social precarity become important here? If you have read the short story, you will see that the first way of a first social interaction is through the child getting bullied in a bathroom of a school, and the child is meant to strip off its clothes. And how does the other children stop the bullying? The children stop the bullying because they get scared, and they are scared of his anatomy. They realize that this person is neither a definitive masculine person nor a definitive feminine person. And the moment the anatomy becomes a part of a challenge, the moment the anatomy becomes questionable, the moment the anatomy becomes fierce and scary, that this person becomes precarious because of the anatomy, because he is sexually different. If you have read the book, if you have read the short story, you will notice that there is no definitive gender given in this particular story. We continuously talk about the sexuality. We continuously try to understand how the sexuality could be. What is the question, the W question that are being raised? Why? What? How? Where? But neither once has it been defined that I am this. It is left to the author's imagination. It is left to the author's understanding of how it is. And the political precarity becomes just the way I had important. He embodies the child, the physical reflection of the Singaporean Merlin. When we see this amazing structure, every time we see Singapore, be it in an advertisement, or even if we are imagining Singapore, we are imagining this structure, this white structure of the lion's head and the fish's tail and water coming out of its body, of its mouth, and people taking pictures in front of it. And when we read this, but at least before I read Siren, I never thought how that can be embodied in a living, breathing, flesh and blood person. But that is what it happens in this particular short story. And by embodying the Merlion as a person, Amanda Lee, politically precarity becomes an important factor in this particular story. How does this person become precarious? What are the queer essential ideas in this particular short story that you read? Because in this particular short story, neither once has it been said that this person identifies as a lesbian, this person identifies as a trans, or this person identifies as non-binary. Not one has any category been sanctioned to our protagonist. If a category is being sanctioned, it kind of becomes easier, Okay, this is what this person's sexuality is. This, I don't agree with this term, but this is what the or quote unquote orientation begins. But here, there is no such category. Here, it is being said that this person with a precarious queer body is mating. I am using this particular mating because for you to understand the political significance of this term, is mating with this person. And this person is exploring this particular body. And when this body is being explored, it is being continuously and appropriately defined that this body does not belong to any category. So does the political becomes personal and the personal becomes political. Singapore as an island is so far away from the rest of the world. I don't mean geographically. I don't mean that it is not attainable. What I mean is that the boundaries are on the island. So if you read at the geography or the read of the landscape or its geographic and demographic attention, you'll see that even the sand with which the Marina Bay is being formed, the sand with which the Singaporean beaches are formed, most of the sand is also imported. So an island which is living and breathing because of that its imports from all the places around the world, it is so far removed. And the far removedness of an island, which is represented because of a Merlion, again, the image of the lion with its tail of a mermaid or tail of a fish, is suddenly being replicated into a living, breathing human being. And the precarity, the moment you look at this person and you realize that this person is challenging and breaking every single stereotype, is when the word queer comes in. And the idea of queerness, this is something which I got very interested in, which is a reason why I got invested into this theory. And I'm a theory person. I love theory, the idea of theory, or in this particular set of literature and studies, is because when you think of the word queer, you realize this word can have so many interpretations. As children, when we are in school, as a couple of 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, if we ask this particular word, what does queer mean? They say that it is something which is not quote unquote natural, which is different, something which is disheveled, something which is not all right. When we look at queer as a child, we think of it as something which is not us, which is something which is different from us. And this othering gets even more profound as we grow up. And this othering is also something which becomes even more vibrant as we think about the idea of precarity or precariousness. There is not much time to expand on the theory of the child, which I would have loved to, because the child is also a very important uh, phenomena in this particular short story. If you read Lee Edelman's idea of how to raise a child, if you think of Edelman, and if there is a new book called Xenofeminism by Helen Hester, if you think of Helen Hester's idea of child, the child itself becomes a very precarious body. The child, growing up of the child is also queer. So I can say every child is queer. If I forget, going back to the beginning of my lecture, that when you are wrapping up a baby in a blue towel and calling it a boy because it has been born with a penis, and that boy growing up realizing that he doesn't feel masculine, he wants to be identified as a woman, and going through that transformation, the child itself is becoming queer. And into that queer body, into that queer structure, we are putting different stereotypes, we are putting different binaries. So if I take you slightly to the idea of Lacan's mirror stage, I did something for it. Yeah. If I take you very slightly to Lacan's mirror stage, what does Lacan mean? What is Lacan saying? Lacan is saying that when the child looks at the mirror for the first time, the child realizes that the child is a separate being. The child realizes that the child is separate from its mother. And when the child is introduced to the realm of language, that is when there is this huge shift from the real to the imaginary. The child can never go back to the real, so therefore always strives for that real. The moment language is introduced to the child enters this realm of imaginary. And the realm of imaginary has laws that needs to be adhered to. So the idea of queerness of the child is broken by the moment language is introduced. The moment the child is wrapped in a blue towel and presented to you as a boy, or the child is wrapped in a pink towel and presented to you as a girl, is when there could be a symbolic interpretation of language introduction to a body of a child. And then with the ritualistic repetition of particular acts is how the child is prepared to be performing as a particular person. So if you are raising there is this person called Grace Lavery. Grace Lavery is a teacher at New York University. Grace Lavery, they were the editor of the Transgender Quarterly journal, which is one of the finest journals when it comes to the queer studies. And I would encourage all of you, if you're interested in queer studies, to read it. So Grace recently said something which is very controversial. Grace said that I am going to raise my child gay. And the question is, how do you raise a child gay? And isn't that a counter-effective point? When we say that sexuality is not a choice, and if you say that you're going to raise your child gay, doesn't it become a very questionable thing to say? Are you not self-contradicting yourself as a queer theorist when you say that sexuality isn't conceivable, sexuality isn't teachable? How can you raise your child gay? And to what Grace says is that when I mean that I want to raise my child gay, I mean that I am not going to repeat the ritualistic performances of raising a child to be masculine or to be feminine. So this kind of brings my point to the fact that a child can be raised queer. The queer body is broken the moment language and rules and all of these are introduced. So going back to Siren, if there is this particular scene in Siren when the father is making braids on the protagonist's hair. The protagonist has long hair and the father is braiding the child's hair. You see so many social stigmas being broken in through, and the entire thing is explained in one line. In one sentence, Amanda Lee is breaking so many significant social, gendered, sexual stereotypes. The father is braiding a child's hair who still looks very masculine. The child, the son, the daughter, the, the baby, the baby who is growing up, the baby whose sexuality is still a question. Whoever that body is getting treated as a non-gendered body by a father who is braiding the child's hair. The father is not braiding his daughter's hair. The father is not braiding his son's hair. The father is braiding the child's hair. And the only reason that the hair is being braided is because they'll go off to sea to catch fish. With the wind and everything, the hair will get messy. So it is the logical aspect to do that. So again, going back to my initial, not mine, Butler's initial definition of what precariousness means, is that our body, our cells, our sexuality, our gender is in relationship to the environment around us. Here, the non-living sea, the ocean, the material ocean becomes important, which leads to the living father to protect his child's hair, to manage its child's hair in some way or the other. So the queer elements of a particular piece of literature cannot be the only fact that this particular character identifies as homosexual, or this particular character of a particular novel that I am reading identifies as trans. Queerness is embedded. What are some innovative methodologies being used in queer research today? Okay, yeah. Before I go to this question, am I clear? What I tried to explain, and I've taken already more than 20 minutes. Is that clear? And if it is clear, I would like to open this up for interactive session and question and answers. Haritha, is that all right?
Yes, the interactive session is on. Please ask your questions or please write in the message box.
So to answer the first question, what are some innovative methodologies being used in queer research today? I think the methodologies depend from what subject that you are studying. If I look at, like I said, I have a queer reading group, and I think Haritha has the link. I can also post the link later and send it to Haritha. So if you're interested, you can join it. In one of my reading sessions, there was this particular participant who is a doctor herself, like a medical doctor. And she asked that, I understand that there are so many differences. I understand that there are so many categories. But when we study medical science, we are meant to use only 3 sexes. Whoever is not masculine, which is the first sex, whoever is not feminine, which is the second sex, belongs to the third sex. So whoever, quote unquote, I'm like referring and emphasizing on the quotations because of its significance. Whoever is not quote unquote normal belongs to the third sex. So you see, the idea of methodology becomes very important when you also have to specify which subject you are trying to study. So if I talk about literature, because that's what we all are doing here, literature can have empirical research, literature can have like I do a very thorough archival research. That is what my specialization is. It also depends on what uh, subject you are studying, because if you look at anthropology, if you look at sociology, the ideology of queer, I wouldn't say ideology is the right word. The presence of the queer community is something which is becoming increasingly important at the moment. So yes, I hope I could answer you. Moving on to the next one, we have oh, this is a very, very interesting question. Karupa Samay, if I am sorry if I am not pronouncing your uh, name correctly. It's a very interesting question. Queer and disability studies intersect a lot. If you just go to Google Scholar and if you just type these particular keynotes, queer studies and disability studies, you'll understand how important these things are. Because if I just take out the lens of precarity, even disability or people who are considered to be disabled are also marginalized. Queer people are also marginalized. And if you're both queer, there is this movie that is coming to my mind, hoping that you, even if you have not seen it, you're somewhat familiar to it, is Margarita with a Straw. I would ask you to just see this, and I'm just saying it because it is so easily available in an all Indian OTT platform, and because I thought that maybe it has Kalki Ketla in it, so it could be a little more familiar to all of us here. So the disability studies and the queer studies are extremely intricately associated, because there are so many theoretical and empirical crossovers. To bring this particular Ram CM's word, methodological crossovers with which that can be read. So it's a very interesting question, and I could speak like hours on it because I am very much invested in that topic, but it's a very important question. And please, like, if you're interested in it, I would encourage you to research on it and maybe do a higher study on it. It's all up to you, but it's a very important question. Thanks for that. How do issues of immigration and asylum intersect with queer identities? What are the unique challenges faced by queer migrants? Oh, amazing question again. So, there's a book called God, I forgot it. It has eluded me at the moment. Um, but the book is about uh, the person is an immigrant, and the person is trying to cross the borders of Mexico to get into the US. And as the person is trying to cross the borders of the Mexico and get into the US, the body of a masculine immigrant has different experience from the body of a feminine immigrant, and how the risks of molestation and the risk of rape is very, very possible in all bodies, irrespective of. And when I say this, let me clarify that I absolutely acknowledge all the atrocities that have happened in the Bangladesh Liberation War, the Rwandan rape incidents. I'm not saying that I do not acknowledge it. I acknowledge every part of it. But when we read, getting raped as a man is also possible. It doesn't only happen to the bodies of women. But again, let me repeat myself, I acknowledge every atrocity that has been happening, that is still going on in Gaza, Palestine. I agree and I accept and I acknowledge everything. But the, there are still very little research on queer immigrants' bodies, and there is very little research on what queer immigrants face. To give you an anecdote, without giving any names, I have an acquaintance who belongs to the Islamic culture and is a homosexual person. And she said that, at this moment, I would rather hide the fact that I am homosexual than to first avoid the problems that I'm facing as a Muslim person in this country. So you see, the closetedness is something which also is right now becoming incidental. In order to save myself, I will portray myself to be something which I'm not, so that somehow the precarity is lost. At least let me be a marginalized uh, religion here, than also being a marginalized sexuality. How does military traditional academy? Okay. How does queer theory engage with post-humanist thoughts, and what new perspective does this bring understanding gender and sexuality? More than post-humanism, there is transhumanism, which is also another branch of post-humanism. Let me give you the name of this book. This is something that I recently read, and this book answers two of your questions. This is a great book. If you want to read it, it is on, the book is called The Politics of Nonconformity, Queer, Disabled, and Posthuman Bodies. So this is a great book which kind of answers a lot of questions here. If you are interested, I would definitely encourage. I have copied the name of the book in the chat box. So posthumanism and queerness is something that led my way into my research, because these are the two theories of posthumanism and queer studies that I was involved in. So posthumanism and queerness brings up a lot of questions. Posthumanism, one of the most interesting questions that I read while I was interesting questions that I came across while I started my research was that for the longest time in history, Black bodies were not considered to be bodies at all. We owned, like, there has been the history of plantation, there has been the history of Black immigration. It also connects to one of the questions that your peers had. And so, if those bodies are not considered to be bodies in history, then how does it become post-human body? To become a post-human body, to become a transhuman body, you have to first acknowledge the fact that these Black bodies were also bodies. So post-humanism and queer is a very important and a very elegant question, which again I would encourage you to read further. Uh, and I disagree with the use of the word orientation. It can be a vague term and sometimes a confining one, but I wanted to know if there's something else I'm missing. Okay. So hi, Parasuraman. Thanks for the question. The reason that I do not agree with the term orientation is because I think it has its limitations. Like when I say my sexual orientation is this, you are challenging the fact that, or I mean, you see how mechanical the term is. The Earth is oriented to the x-axis. The Earth is oriented to the pole star. So I can say the Earth has this orientation. How can say a human body has an orientation? So when you say that, it is something that I stand by. You can have a complete different understanding of the word orientation. And as a human being and as a scholar, I think that's the right way to be. But I feel that the term orientation becomes very mechanical because it contradicts the idea of the fact that sexuality is not a choice. So you cannot be by choice oriented to another sex. If person X is oriented to person Y, then it kind of nullifies the factor that sexuality is not a choice. So for me, I believe that orientation is not a word that suits the way I think. I think it is a word that needs to be changed. Yeah. How do queer experiences and movements differ across various global contexts, and what can we learn from this difference? Hi, Anupama. This is a very interesting question and very important question. So, thanks a lot for asking this question. How do queer experiences and movements differ from various groups? To go back to the first thing from which I began is that if we go back, if we trace queer studies to gender studies, if we trace gender studies to feminist studies have a lot of branches. The reason feminist studies have so many branches is because a white person's feminism cannot be similar to a black person's feminism. A black person's feminism cannot be similar to a post-colonial person feminism. A post-colonial uh, African or a post-colonial Rwandan person's feminism cannot be similar to the post-colonial Afghani person's feminism. Afghani person's feminism is not similar to my feminism as an Indian person. Similarly, there are so many differences in queer experiences as well. If you look at the queer experience of and I will take up Singapore because Siren is written on the context of Singapore. You have to know the Singaporean government still doesn't acknowledge the LGBTQIA plus community. I think my most dearest friend is Singaporean, and it is my friend who introduced me to this particular author, and he is gay, and he says as a gay person, and you have to know that Singapore has 2 years of national services, compulsory national services. So every single person who is quote unquote a man who has a penis after becoming 18 has to have 2 years of army training. And that person, and you know how the training of an army is. We have some idea, all of us. Even I don't know if, at least I have never I was never good at physical things, and so I have no idea. But it doesn't really matter who you are there, even if you're a gay person, even if you're getting bullied there amidst hundreds of heterosexual masculine patriarchal people. Doesn't matter, because you are born with a penis, you have to be representing the country. Like the very way I just gave an example a few minutes back. Like my friend, she says that right now, let me hide the fact that I am gay because it is much more dangerous. I am not going to name the state and I'm not going to name the university where she is, but it is much more dangerous to be gay and living in this particular state of India and be visibly gay. So let me be a conventional woman here who is just a Muslim person, because that has enough challenges altogether. So, the queer experiences are very different in the entire global context. Let me suggest you this book. This book is called Sex and Lies. I am horrible with names. That's why most of the names elude me. It is on the Moroccan concept of being a woman and the Moroccan concept of being a gay woman. So Sex and I found it's a very thin book. It's around 250 pages, and it's a lovely book. So I would request you to read it. I'm just gonna write the name here: Sex and Lies. Yeah. Okay. How do essentialist and constructivist perspectives differ in the views of the role of genetics in understanding queerness? I do not think queerness and genetics are related. I don't think because I am gay, my child will be gay, or because this person is gay, that person's child will be gay. I do not believe in that. This is I don't think it is logically possible from my readings so far. I haven't come across anything which suggests that these are related. So I don't know. I don't think this uh, this can be possibly related. Yeah. But please go ahead, and I don't think like this is this is possible, but yeah. Yeah, does anyone have any other question? Thank you, these were like amazing questions. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for igniting our thoughts and widening our perspectives. I think it's time to move on to the conclusion. For that, I invite Anuvallavi to deliver vote of thanks.
Good evening, one and all present here. On this wonderful evening, I would like to present a word of thanks. On behalf of the PG Department of English, I extend my sincere gratitude to our HOD, Dr. Anjana J, for the constant supporting all our endeavors. A special thanks to our chief guest, Ritobina Chakraborty, for accepting our invitation and for being here with us today in spite of her busy schedule. Your thoughts have truly inspired us. Thank you, ma'am, once again for your stimulating and captivating words. My sincere gratitude to all the teachers, coordinators, research scholars, academicians from other universities, audience for gracing the occasion and participating in the interactive session. Once again, I would like to thank each one of you. I am very grateful for giving me this opportunity. With sincere feeling of gratitude, I would like to take your leave. Be happy, be bright, be you, and have a nice day. Thank you.